In the aftermath of the raid of municipal offices belonging to Mayoral Committee members JP Smith and Xanthea Limberg, the Good Party has raised concerns of alleged leaks before the raid took place. The party says the alleged leaks may put the integrity of the investigation at risk. To discuss this, I'm joined by Good Party Secretary General Brett Herron. Brett, appreciate your time. Now, how serious are the allegations that Helen Zille and JP Smith were tipped off about the raids, and what are the potential legal consequences if this indeed is true?
Good afternoon. Look, I think it's a very simple matter to understand. The raids that were conducted on the MACO members or MMC's JP Smith and Xanthea Limberg's offices would have been conducted under warrants issued by a judicial officer after the judicial officer, who's a judge or a magistrate, was convinced that there was a reasonable prospect that evidence of a crime would be found when the raids were being conducted. When Helen Zille made a statement to the media saying that she knew from late last year that the raids were imminent, that raises a lot of alarm bells, because obviously the raids or the search and seizure operation is not meant to be forewarned to those who are implicated, who then have the opportunity to hide, eliminate, move evidence. So the fact that Helen Zille is saying she knew late last year that these raids were going to take place is a serious breach of the judicial process. It's a serious breach of the investigation gating process, and potentially undermines the integrity and credibility of the investigation, and may even amount to an obstruction of justice.
Now, do you believe the claims of a political plot are credible, or is this an attempt to deflect attention from the investigation?
Well, the claims of political plot in any democracy around the world is always possible, but I would say it's highly unlikely, given that these raids can only take place, as I said, under a warrant issued by a judicial officer. That judicial officer would then have to be part of this plot, because the judicial officer has to be convinced, in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act, that the police or the investigating officers have sufficient reason to make that search and seizure operation. So the investigating officers, the police, would have to go under oath before a judge or a magistrate and convince the judge and the magistrate that there is reason to conduct such an invasive policing action. I mean, we are all entitled to the right to privacy, and the invasion of that right to privacy is only enabled by a warrant in exceptional circumstances. So, yes, it is possible that there's some elaborate, intricate plot that involves a number of players, but it's highly unlikely to include the judicial officers who would have been involved. And so I would suggest that there must have been some evidence before a judge or a magistrate who authorized that warrant of search and seizure.
Now, obviously, if they knew that the raid was imminent, and from what Helen Zille said, based on what we've seen on social media and what you've confirmed in this conversation, just how useful was this raid? Because obviously, if they've had months and months to hide stuff, if there is stuff to be hidden, then it's almost useless.
Well, this is the alarming and concerning part of Helen Zille's statement, that she was tipped off or knew about the raids, that the raids were imminent. And this is why I think the South African Police Services need to answer the question. We must remember Helen Zille was the Premier in the Western Cape for 10 years. The Premier of each province is often in contact with high-ranking police officers, with the provincial commissioners of police. And so it's not maybe surprising that Helen Zille would be tipped off. But what did she do with that tip? Did she inform the implicated parties to enable them to eliminate evidence? And if she did so, did she obstruct justice? Did she raise with the provincial commissioner that she received this tip-off and thus there was a breach in the investigation process? I mean, as a former premier and as a leader of a political party, she has duties that go beyond just those to her party. And I think that there's an obstruction of justice case that SAPS needs to address in this case.
Brett, what impact could this scandal have on the DA's standing in Cape Town and nationally if the leader of the party or chair of the Federal Council confirms that she that she had this information, that she accepted to receive this information, which at the very least would be deemed improper?
Well, entirely. I mean, the narrative that the DA operates a clean governance approach to where they govern, the narrative that they separate party and state, and always do so, is undermined by her own statement that she was tipped off or became aware at the end of last year that the raids were imminent. Now, she doesn't say, as far as I can see, what she did with that information. But if she was inclined to protect the party instead of protecting the course of justice and tipped off Smith and Limberg, and that appears to have been the case because Smith himself issued a statement saying he became aware that he was under investigation and he raised it with the mayor and the speaker of the City of Cape Town Council, and they wrote to the National Prosecuting Authority and to the police to find out if it was true. So someone tipped off J.P. Smith, and if it was Helen Zille, then I think there's a case of obstruction of justice that needs to be answered.
Well, the public obviously would like to know, how can they be assured that this case is being handled fairly and transparently? Is that still possible?
Well, I mean, the fact that there was a senior member of the political party involved who was aware that the raids were imminent before the raids took place, some weeks or some months maybe before the raids took place, does taint, I think, the credibility of the investigation and the raid. And obviously, I mean, if the implicated parties have something to hide and there is evidence of wrongdoing and they were aware that the raids were coming, then I mean, who would expect them to leave the evidence lying in their office? So I think it would be really important for SAPS and the Western Cape Provincial Police Commissioner to come forward and brief the public and the media on what the information that Helen Zille had means for the investigation.
All right, Brett, before we let you go, just walk us through what the Good Party is doing, will do to ensure that these various processes are obviously taken into account or implemented.
So we will be taking advice tomorrow, Monday, on the statements by Helen Zille and what they mean from senior members of the Hawks, and whether there shouldn't be an investigation of what Helen Zille's role was in this investigation and whether she interfered in the investigation. We've also written to the Speaker of Council, who is authorized to provide city-funded legal support to councillors when they are involved in legal matters arising out of the performance of their duties, to clarify that being an implicated party in a fraud and corruption tender scandal is not a performance of your duties, and to make sure that the city is not funding legal services to Limberg, to Smith, and to the official in Smith's office who was arrested on Friday for trying to interfere with the search.
Brett Herron, Secretary General of the Good Party, thanks for speaking to us. And he confirms that the Good Party is not standing by on these allegations of possible interference by Helen Zille and certainly some DA officials in an investigation.